Ho, ho, ho! Is this thing on? Mic check. One sleigh, two sleigh. That's right. I've got a podcast now. Stories, jokes, and some serious North Pole nonsense. Santa Has a Podcast is out now at santahasapodcast.com. Ho, ho, ho!
Support American jobs while standing up for your values. OldGloryDepot.com brings you conservative pride on premium, made-in-USA gear. Don't settle. Wear your patriotism proudly. Visit OldGloryDepot.com today.
I say this every election cycle, and I'll say it again. The 2024 political field was intense, so don't get left behind in 2025. If you're running for office, the first thing on your to-do list should be securing your name on the web. With a yourname.vote domain from GoDaddy.com, you'll stand out and make your mark. Don't wait. Get yours today.
Welcome to Breaking Battlegrounds. I'm your host, Chuck Warren, Kylie Campbell in studio. Today we are honored to have with us our first guest, Gordon Rayner. He is an author and the associate editor of the Daily Telegraph. As you know, we've had many reporters on from the Daily Telegraph. It's one of our favorite papers. And you will find him on Twitter at Gordon Rayner, last name spelled R-A-Y-N-E-R. Gordon, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Jeremy, go ahead and let's play this first clip.
BBC has clearly said to themselves, I think Donald Trump incited the Capitol riots. Therefore, I am going to edit this or present this in a way that matches my worldview, not the view of what actually happened. And that I'm afraid is something that we have witnessed with the BBC time and time again. Isn't that what we're saying here, Gordon, really?
Well, I can't think of any examples that are as egregious as this because this is done in such a slick way. There's no way this has happened by accident.
No.
Also, I think it's important to point out, speaking to Tim's point about how you make clear when there's a break, we're all used to seeing things where perhaps video is spliced together and there's some kind of a screen wipe or a white fade or something that makes it obvious that
time has passed.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
There is none of that. It is very, very slick, very carefully done. There's actually 3 different parts of his speech that they've had to put together to make one sentence.
Yes.
And there is no way you're going to spot that if you're a viewer, and that is clearly deliberate.
Because they also cut away in terms of image. So obviously you would see the splice if you stayed with the camera on Donald Trump, but by cutting away from Trump to a crowd, it looks like the camera's just shifted rather than it's a long time later.
So what happened was that there's a BBC documentary program called Panorama, which is pretty much their flagship documentary program. And a week before the US election last year, they broadcast a 1-hour special about Donald Trump. And as part of that, they showed a section of his speech on January the 6th, 2021, the day of the Capitol Hill riot. And if you watched that program, you would have heard Trump say, I'm going to walk down to the Capitol, I'll be with you, and we're going to fight like hell. And then you saw a clip of Proud Boys marching on the Capitol. Now, as a viewer, you would have just seen that, thought that was exactly what happened and the sequence that it happened in. The truth was that, for a start, the Proud Boys marching on the Capitol happened an hour before Trump spoke. Certainly the clip that they showed was an hour before Trump spoke. And then Trump did not speak the words that the BBC made out that he had said. He said that we're going to walk down to the Capitol, we're going to protest peacefully. It wasn't until 54 minutes later that he said we're going to fight, and that was in the context of him talking about democracy slightly more generally. So the BBC made him say something that he hadn't said.
Will there be any accountability at the BBC for this? Now, they're funded by a television license fee, right? This is basically like our PBS to a degree. Is that a fair financing comparison? Will there be any, I guess, heads on the mantle, I guess we can say?
Well, that's a very good question. So the accountability comes from, first of all, within the BBC. So, for example, the Director General of the BBC, effectively the Chief Executive, they are appointed by a board. So it's the board's responsibility if they feel that they should go. There are also obviously people below that, including program editors. That's the responsibility of the Director General. But the government has a role in this because, as you say, it's funded by the taxpayer. The BBC exists under something called a Royal Charter, which effectively gives them the right to collect money from people for the license fee. They also get top-up payments from general taxation for things like the BBC World Service, which is primarily radio. And part of this whole story also includes BBC Arabic, which reports on particularly Gaza, and there are allegations that they've been extremely biased in their reporting as well. So the accountability comes from all of those things, and we await developments. As it stands, no one has been sacked, no one's been disciplined, no one has resigned.
Has there ever been an example where the BBC has been caught doctoring or falsifying a story and someone's been fired? I understand there was a scandal once with the Queen and Annie Leibovitz.
Right.
Explain to our audience what happened there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very direct comparison. I would argue that the previous example was not anything like as bad. But in 2007, the BBC made a documentary about the Queen, the late Queen, and she was shown in a trailer for the documentary appearing to storm out of a photo shoot with Annie Leibovitz. She was shown having a slightly spiky conversation with Leibovitz, and then they showed her sort of walking down a corridor looking like she was in a huff. And in fact, the footage of her walking down the corridor was her going into that photo shoot before she'd even spoken to Leibovitz. So it was shown out of order. There was a big fuss about it, and the controller of BBC One lost his job over that. Now, to me, deliberately doctoring a speech by a politician is a far worse thing to do. But it does feel as though the culture within the BBC is different now, that they think that as long as they sort of sit tight, nothing's going to happen to them. And frankly, I think there is a lack of leadership. And that's why this has happened, because program makers think they can do this stuff because of the culture that exists there at the moment.
So this memo, which you have released today, and folks, you can find this memo on Gordon's Twitter account, and we also retweet it, and we'll be boosting it so we can have as many people see it as possible. So there's a former standards advisor named Michael Prescott. He was an advisor to the BBC editorial board. Is that correct?
Yes, a committee called the Editorial Guidelines and Standards Committee. So it's their sort of arbiter of what impartiality is.
So what was Michael's background? I mean, there's going to be some people say, why did he release this? Did he have an axe to grind, or he was generally concerned, do you feel, about what BBC is doing on big topics? Because I want to talk to you more about this. Besides the Trump January 6th, and we've seen the press in America do as well, and we're not justifying people who went to the Capitol that day at all, folks. Just get this clear. But just report the facts. Make your own opinion, report the facts. And they've done it with Gaza and so forth. What is his ideology? What's his background? Because I think his background will give credibility more to this memo that he wrote.
Yeah, so I think firstly, it's important to point out he's not the person who I got this document from. He wrote this memo to the BBC board, who are, as we were saying before, they're the ones who hire and fire effectively the chief exec. He's a former journalist. He was the political editor some time ago of the Sunday Times here in Britain. And then he went on to have a career in corporate comms. He worked for, among others, BT, which is the sort of biggest phone operator in Britain. And then he was hired to be an independent advisor to this editorial guidelines committee, as we said. So his job really was to sort of cast a sort of impartial eye over what they were doing, be sort of inside the BBC, but not part of the BBC, so that he felt that he could speak honestly. And they had two of those people. And he was, frankly, as you'll see if you read the memo, he was appalled by what he was seeing. He thought that he was seeing bias in all sorts of different parts of the BBC and in the way they were covering things. He tried to raise that with managers. And whenever he raised it, they did nothing about it, which is why he felt that he had to write this very stiff, lengthy memo to the BBC board saying, you need to sort this.
Folks, we're with Gordon Rayner. He's the associate editor of the Daily Telegraph. You can find his writings and more on this scandal at his Twitter account at Gordon Rayner, Rayner. And he's also a long-suffering Newcastle United fan. So we're
and you know what that is, do you?
Yes, I've the last couple of years I've gone out and attended 3 or 4 English Premier League contests out in your great country.
Okay,
and, it's
that's a whole other podcast.
Yes, and it's as I tell people for Americans, say I just can't watch it on TV. I said you just got to go there. It's a different experience. It's a much different experience. So
Okay.
So, okay, there's much that's coming out on this memo as well. So, for example, there's a story out today you have about their app that they suppress certain news notifications. Can you tell our audience about what BBC is doing on that with government money?
Yeah, so this again came out of this memo to the board. They had so the author and another chap that he was working with had done quite a lot of analysis of various parts of BBC output, and one of the things they had looked at was the BBC News app, and in particular the push notifications that they sent out to their 7 million users. And they just looked at what those were. So they put out something like 219, I think it was, news alerts in the month of September 2023. So they took that as a sample. And what they were finding was that whoever was in control of those alerts was giving a very partial view of what the news was, either the news of the day or even just the news that the BBC was covering. So, for example, they were very surprised to discover that only 4 of those 200 and odd news alerts was anything to do with immigration. Obviously, immigration being one of the big topics in the UK right now. And of those 4, 3 of them were about what awful conditions migrants have to live in when they get to the UK. In the same period, 4 on migration, 12 on a comedian called Russell Brand, who had got himself into trouble over sexual harassment. He's currently awaiting trial. So, and incidentally, in that particular month, there had been a record number of people arriving in small boats across the channel, arriving illegally. That wasn't mentioned at all in the news alerts.
We have about a minute left here on this, and when we get back for our next segment, I want to talk about the reporting on Gaza, and I also want to talk about their trans coverage, that they censored it by its own reporters as well. My quick question for you, and to our audiences, is with a minute left, what can be done by BBC, by Parliament, or is it out of Parliament's hands? Is it just sort of an independent agency now?
No. So one thing that is happening is that there is a parliamentary committee that called the Culture, Media and Sport Committee. They have the right to bring people in to give evidence. They've started an inquiry into this. Michael Prescott, the chap who wrote this memo, is going to give evidence to them next week. And they have also written to the BBC chairman to asking him for answers on this. I suspect they will end up calling the BBC chairman and quite possibly the Director General to give evidence. Frankly, if they're not satisfied with what they hear, then I think it becomes a problem for those senior BBC managers, and their position becomes very difficult.
Thank you. We're with Gordon Rayner. He is the associate editor of the Telegraph. This is Breaking Battlegrounds. We'll be right back.
All right, imagine this. You're running for president. Yes, president. What's the first thing you need? Well, besides the $1 million fundraising, you need to secure your web domain. You need your name, .vote. Easy to remember, straight to the point, and a direct link to your campaign. No, but seriously, whether you're getting out to vote or convincing people that yes, you can fix the potholes on Main Street, a .vote domain helps you stand out. It's not just a website, it's a call to action. Head over to GoDaddy.com or name.com, type in your name, .vote, and boom, you're ready to make a lasting impact. Get started today with your .vote web address.
Welcome back to Breaking Battlegrounds. We're continuing our conversation with Gordon Rayner, who's visiting us across the pond here today. And Gordon, so I have Sirius satellite in my cars. And if there's something happening in Africa or something, I always turn on the BBC channel because they're like the only ones covering it, right? I mean, if there's anything Middle East, I ignore the BBC. I just I'm not getting the full story here, right? This is very lopsided. It may be that way in Africa as well, but I turn it on. The BBC has been a very important medium for information throughout the world for decades.
Right.
Do you feel that this type of bias demeans what they do, that makes people like me suspect of everything they report now?
Look, the BBC is an incredibly important part of life in Britain as a whole. And I know that sounds slightly sort of grand, but it is. It's important in providing impartial news within Britain, but it's, if anything, in some ways, it's even more important on the international stage because the BBC has always projected British values abroad. It's a very important part of soft power. Without getting too sort of, misty-eyed about it, in a lot of countries for decades, it's been the only reliable source of truth and impartiality, especially in countries that are run by, dictators. So impartiality is the absolute cornerstone of all of that. And if you allow that to be eroded, which is what I think is happening, then you risk the very future of the BBC itself, and it is risking being destroyed from within. I think the leaders of the BBC have lost sight of impartiality being the most important thing it has, and lost sight of trust being the most important thing it has. And once you lose that, it's really hard to get it back.
Yes.
Look, I don't want to see the BBC fail. I've grown up with the BBC. Like most people in Britain, I have a lot of affection for it. I think it's important. I don't want to see it being destroyed. But I think that is the way it's heading.
Do you think there's a possibility you see it just being completely defunded by the government like we've done to NPR and PBS here in the United States?
I think in the long term, that is something which it's going to be difficult for the BBC to avoid, quite frankly. I think there's a wider problem for the BBC that, like any public service broadcaster in this century, effectively, they're competing with streamers. Increasingly, people are not going to these places to view content. The audience is diminishing. Just being able to justify charging people a license fee is becoming harder and harder. So I think in the long term, even the medium term, I'm not sure how much longer that funding model is going to survive.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the one thing the BBC's done, which I have been very appalled by, is that they just took at face value anything the Gaza Health Ministry reported or anything that was anti-Israel reported regarding the current war that was there and that we just have a current ceasefire on. What did you discover on this report about what BBC's bias was towards the Hamas lies and so forth?
Well, I think the memo that was written by this BBC advisor sort of confirmed an awful lot of things that we all suspected, or that we'd even, in many cases, reported on in the past. But it was worse even than what we'd thought. There's a very good example in here of a reporter who was being used a lot by BBC Arabic, and he is a Palestinian-based journalist called Sama Al-Zanin. We did a story about him in April where we pointed out that he had posted on social media that Jews should be burned as Hitler did. At the time, we thought that he'd been on BBC Arabic about 12 times. When the author of this report did his own sort of checks on this, he found that guy had actually been on BBC Arabic 244 times in the space of 18 months.
Oh my gosh.
Another guy who said that Israelis were not human and the Jews were devils. He was on BBC Arabic 522 times in the same period. So you're basically talking about these guys being on every day.
Yes.
And they have very, very, anti-Semitic views. They're not suitable to be used as they're not even experts. They were being introduced as journalists, often reporting from the scene, sort of thing. They're not impartial, and frankly, if you can't find people who are impartial, then you're just going to have to find some other way.
Well, I think it's almost ironic that the BBC. I don't think they've even claimed to be anything but pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas in a lot of ways. I mean, and this doesn't BBC Arabic get funded by a grant by the British Foreign Office?
So it's mainly funded by the license fee, but it gets top-up funding partly from the BBC international services are allowed to advertise, so they do get some advertising revenue. And then there is top-up funding via a grant from the Foreign Office, as you say. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of unhappiness at this end about the fact that taxpayers' money is being used to fund BBC Arabic. And it's not just the use of reporters who are biased. It goes beyond BBC Arabic just to the BBC as a whole. And this report suggests that the BBC is too quick to believe the worst about Israel whenever anything comes out of that area that is difficult to verify. It's too quick to believe stuff that comes out of Gaza via Hamas. And that it is effectively downplaying the suffering of Israelis in order to make Israel always appear to be the aggressor.
Do you see, and this is different from what we're talking about, do you see a possible exodus of Jewish British citizens in the United Kingdom?
Look, I'm not Jewish. I have seen evidence of people who have said that they feel less safe than they were 15, 20 years ago. And I think that Jewish people would probably tell you if they were speaking to you now that to a greater or less extent, anti-Semitism has been allowed to build in this country, partly because of politicians failing to get a grip of it. I don't know about an exodus, but as I say, I think that there is a feeling that Jewish people don't feel safe.
Oh, yeah. Well, why would they? Quickly, we got about a minute left here. Tim Davie is the Director General of the BBC. Do you see with these reports coming out by the Telegraph that he is forced to resign, that BBC says this is the head we're going to give you to get some pressure off us?
Do I think that's what's going to happen?
Yeah. Do you think he'll be forced to resign?
He's survived an awful lot of things so far, and I suspect that the pressure will come not so much from the BBC. I think it'll come from politicians. I think it'll come from license fee payers. I think it will become clear that the viewers are no longer going to stand for this. They are, by the way, losing license fee payers in quite big numbers. More and more people are just deciding they're not going to pay the license fee anymore. And so I think that probably will be what decides his future. Very often it just gets to a point where these people realize the game is up and that it's time to go.
Yeah. Well, Gordon Rayner, thank you for visiting us today. We know it's late in your afternoon here, and we appreciate everything you do. Folks, please follow him at Twitter at Gordon Rayner. And subscribe to the Telegraph. We do. It's a great paper. You'll learn a lot about the world. We appreciate the reporting. And go Newcastle United, Gordon.
Thank you very much. Away the lads, as we say.
Have a fantastic weekend. This is Breaking Battlegrounds. We'll be back.
Thank you.
Old Glory Depot isn't just a website. It's a movement. Featuring unapologetically conservative shirts and gear, we're proud to deliver 100% American-made products. From premium materials to bold designs, every purchase supports American jobs and celebrates our country. Show your pride, support your values, and shop oldglorydepot.com because patriotism never goes out of style.
All right, welcome back to Breaking Battlegrounds. Our next guest up today, Zineb Riboua, research fellow with the Hudson Institute Center for Peace and Security in the Middle East, writes extensively about geopolitics and great power competition throughout the Middle East and North Africa. Z, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
So Z, you're Moroccan Berber, which is a tribe in North Africa. Explain to our audience, who are probably not quite aware of the geography out there, what this is exactly, how big that is, and what does that mean?
Yeah. I'm originally from Morocco. It's a country in North Africa, looking at the Atlantic and the Mediterranean. Berber it means the indigenous people of North Africa in general, and they are much more present in Morocco than in other places in the region. There are different Berbers. There are Berbers from the north, the Rif, the Schleu, etc. I am much more a little bit next to the Atlas Mountains in Morocco, for those who ever visited. And so yes, it's more of like an ethnicity in Morocco. They speak what is called Amazigh. It's the language, and they have their own rituals, culture, also mixed very well with the Arab Islamic culture in Morocco, and so they have distinctive, I would say, identity and political identity in Morocco. And so yeah, this is basically a grand summary of it.
So how did you decide, I'm leaving home, I'm going to school in France, and I'm going to become a policy expert in foreign policy? What led you to that?
Yeah, so I've always been interested in actually writing. I always loved that. Of course, at the time I was in high school, I thought I would just go do a French program, join a big French school, and then maybe stay there or do something else. But as I was in France, once I landed, I really realized that I was much more someone who likes to express ideas, to write about ideas, to actually get into big debates. And I had a blog since I was 19. It was all in French. And so I figured that I don't think I'm going to be the best consultant or the best investment banker, but there are two things or three that I know about geopolitics, my own region, how things can go. And so I thought, why not just try and go to Washington and do an internship or something and figure out if I'm actually good for that. And so yeah, that's how I came to the United States the first time in 2020. I did an internship, really focused on the Middle East, and started an online project on what China was doing in the Middle East and North Africa. And I thought that, yeah, I actually really like that. Maybe I should just continue my studies. And so I continued my studies in Washington, and then I started working at the Hudson Institute as a research fellow, where I focus mainly on Russia and China involvement in the Middle East, but I also cover the region as a whole, and how it impacts U.S. foreign policy.
So what is Russia and China's role in the Middle East and North Africa that Americans would not understand? And you have 2 minutes on that question.
Yeah, sure. So my assumption as someone who works on this is that Russia is a great power. China is a great power. They both need the Middle East for different reasons. China mainly for energy. It takes 45% of its oil and gas from the Middle East. Russia, not much because of the energy, but because of the importance of the Middle East geopolitically. It is a very important region in terms of coordinating, for example, through different multilateral organizations, which Russia actually needs, for example, to push its own agenda. It's also a region that is very important for Russia in terms of having access to the Mediterranean Sea, which is why the Russians went to Syria, for example, to save Assad at the time, and which is why the Russians are in Libya, for example. And so there are different reasons why each country is in the region, but I would say that in general, the Middle East is a key region in the world. It has the highest concentration of resources and the highest concentration of U.S. allies, which tells you how much it actually matters politically for any country that wants to have influence in the world. And so at the time, as I was a student, I would see, for example, China rising in Morocco. I would see a lot of Chinese entrepreneurs, etc. And I found that very intriguing. Why would they be there? And so I started investigating, and it was a lot more how China wants to be this leader of the global South, wants to be a leader to a parallel order to the one of the United States. And they see all of these countries very important to do so.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Zineb Riboua, we're coming right back here with more on Breaking Battlegrounds. Stay tuned.
Sam and I are always talking about being prepared, whether it's hurricanes in Florida, earthquakes in California, flooding in Arizona, or supply chain disruptions.
Exactly, Chuck. When pharmacies shut down, it does not matter how tough you are, you still need access to critical medicine.
That's why we trust Jace Medical. The Jace case comes with 5 life-saving antibiotics and key over-the-counter meds, so you're covered when things get disrupted.
And Jace goes beyond just the Jace case. They also offer first aid kits, daily prescriptions, and long-term nutrition with Jace Pantry. Don't wait for the next hurricane warning or natural disaster. Take control of your health and peace of mind today.
Visit jace.com and use code FUTURE at checkout for $10 off your order. That's FUTURE at JASE.com.
In today's digital world, standing out is more important than ever. Whether you're running for office, leading a cause, or hosting a vote for the cutest pet in town, you need a web domain that's simple, memorable, and action-oriented. You need a .vote web domain. It's clear, impactful, and establishes a lasting presence for your campaign. Don't wait. Head to GoDaddy.com or Name.com, type in your name.vote, and get started today. Because after all, every pet deserves a web address that's as special as they are.
Welcome back to Breaking Battlegrounds with yours, Chuck Warren. I'm Sam Stone. We're continuing on now with Zineb Riboua. She is a research fellow at the Hudson Institute Center for Peace and Security in the Middle East. Follow her on X at Zineb Riboua. Z, you had a great piece that Chuck and I both enjoyed. Zoran Mamdani, Islam as a Language and American Third-Worldism. Can you touch on that piece? And specifically, let's start by explaining to the audience what both Islam as a language and Third-Worldism mean.
Right. Yeah, sure. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed the piece. To start, Third-Worldism is really a school of thought of how to see the world and how to study the world. And it really emerged in the later in the mid-20th century, where it was really this increase and great debate about the Soviet Union and also about non-aligned countries, and also about other countries that were not as developed and where do they stand and how they should proceed. And at the time, one of the main thought regarding, the third world actually means quite literally a world that is not highly developed and not basically in the medium developed, and then basically excluded from the great power competitions, etc. And third worldism actually means much more of a post-colonial project, in the sense that a lot of these countries are products of colonization, and they just, for example, won independence. They just succeeded in gaining independence, and so the school of thought basically explains how, as a country that just gained independence, it is a country that is structurally and systematically still tied to the colonial project of the empire that dominated it. And there is no other way to succeed as an independent country unless one purifies itself from all of the ills and evils of that said empire. And it sets the tone for this idea of oppressor and oppressed and victim, etc., and the victimhood side of it. And so I basically explained how it is a very specific school of thought. It is a school of thought of the left. They generally see, some people generally see the world that way, that the world is basically divided and that there should be a global uprising against what they think is evil empire, Western hegemony. And I explained basically how it is very different from Islamism, because Islamism affirms Islam as a real political project that can be pursued. What people don't actually usually realize, because a lot of the media, etc., there's much more coverage of terrorism than of genuine Islamist projects, is that you cannot run as an Islamist without tying a lot of your policies to Sharia law, in the sense that Islamism is basically the pursuit of a political and theological project, and therefore there are laws that dictate that. And I saw that Mamdani was not necessarily doing that. I mean, he was talking about I think some sort of Islam or Muslims, but it was never in the way of a political Sharia project. It was more of what I thought was a third worldist way, where Islam was more used and as a language, where Islam is not seen as a faith, but much more as a way to rally the masses, the religion of basically the oppressed of New York, and that it is a call for unity. And so Islam here, I think in Mamdani's way of talking and thinking, is much more of a religion that serves as a language much more than a faith.
Well, and that certainly was true of him, but then you have that sort of counter to that, right, with some of the folks around him who embrace a very Islamist view.
Yes, I have no doubt about that. I think I think someone who's one of his advisors are, etc. But I think they also figured out that they can't really run and they can't really win a campaign talking about that, and they've been very clever about how to talk about Islam, I believe, because to appeal to appeal to the majority and to appeal to a wide range of political identities and peoples, you have to be a little bit clever of how to weaponize it. And I think the function of Islam was a little bit much more different than how we're going to ban the usage of or like ban girls from wearing skirts, etc. This is where I think Islamism usually goes, but I think here it's a little bit much more subversive, I would say, where Islam is much more about we should take into consideration the rise of, for example, Islamophobia in 9/11, things like that.
So let me ask you this, okay? So what you're telling me and putting it together here, and I figured out why, okay? So exit polling showed Mamdani getting 62% of foreign-born voters in New York. For those who are American-born, he only got 32%. Would it be fair to say, this is a two-part question that Sam's going to come with a question. Would it be fair to say that A, he understood that, so hence he talked this third-worldism to obtain that vote. He was smart enough to realize where the voters were, right? Which is something a lot of which to me now makes him scarier, because he understood where he needed to go.
He's an actor.
He's an actor, so he understood where he needed to go. So would you say that's probably why he preached this third-worldism? And then second of all, what does that mean for his governing?
Well, you're absolutely right. And I will add something else. People talk a lot about Israel after October 7th, but there's also an America after October 7th. All of the protests that followed against Israel in New York, all of those people calling for globalizing the Intifada, etc., that gave birth to a certain climate and environment that I think he absolutely understood, in a sense that there's already this ecosystem and cosmos of universities, NGOs, other organizations, nonprofit, portraying America as this great evil, constantly oppressing its peoples, and especially against migrants, etc., while American Jews in New York were getting harassed. And I think that he obviously understood that, and he played on the language of that. And a lot of people are college educated, from good universities, good jobs. They're the perfect urban cosmopolitan people, and they completely understood that language as well. Why? Because they've been familiar with it since they were in university. And so, of course, there's this part of the climate and also appealing to a wider audience. But obviously, on the migrant side, etc., it was also something that they can easily recognize. I would add something, however. I checked the polls, and I thought that it was interesting, however, that he did not get an overwhelming majority on the Muslim vote.
Really?
And
What was the numbers? What were the numbers?
I think it was the last poll I saw was less than 55%.
Well, that just tells me there's a lot of Muslims in New York who just want to be Americans. That's the reason they're there.
Yeah, so there is actually I will have to see now because new polls are coming. But if it's true, if this stays true, what I would say is that it's because it clashes with Islam itself. And you have American Muslims in New York who actually have fled a lot of the dysfunctions of their own countries and see Islam as a way, as not just as a religion, a spirituality, but also it's also a mentality and a way of life. And you cannot be in this perpetual hysteria about victimhood and that you're constantly a victim. It's a religion really about honor and pride throughout history, and one can just read that. And so they don't recognize the Zohran Mamdani way of speaking about how, once you're a Muslim, you're a victim in the United States. Everyone oppresses you. Everyone hates you. There's just Islamophobia. A lot of, I think, Muslims in the United States saw that as a very aggressive and negative message. And I think this is why they did not vote for him. For the others, of course, I think that, as you said, there are newcomers, and there's also the university cosmos that nourished and continues nourishing this idea.
Do you think that played a sort of an opposite role in Minnesota with Omar Fatah losing to Jacob Fry there, where he embraced a very Islamist view versus third worldism?
Unfortunately, I have not followed Minnesota as closely. I will at some point, but because I'm not as familiar.
It's obviously not the same level of attention on that one. I want to move on before we have about 3.5 minutes left here to another piece you did, The Logic of Trump's Neutralization Strategy. I thought that was a great piece because you really laid out how the history of U.S. interaction with Israel changed over successive prior administrations and then has been totally flipped on its head by Trump. Talk about what he's doing there and the successes he appears to be having and why it makes sense to continue this road.
Yeah, so I'm glad you enjoyed the piece. I tried to explain how Trump actually reversed the way we approach the Middle East in the sense that throughout administrations, it's always been about a process, about solving a conflict. And Trump actually is not that way. He's much more oriented towards America's interests, about U.S. interests in the region, and therefore he was very clear about who are America's enemies and who are America's friends. And so he was very clear about Israel being America's friends. They have huge military capabilities. They have immense intelligence capabilities. The operations they've been doing, for those who have been following the Hezbollah, etc., absolutely masterful. And so for Trump, this is an asset, and it makes no sense to be negative about any interaction the United States has with Israel. And I think that mentality helped as he countered Iran's proxies, that have been involved in killing Americans. He countered Iran's nuclear facilities. And because he did a lot of that, it actually helped other U.S. allies in the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, UAE, etc., to get closer to the United States, and also gave birth to the Abraham Accords. And so what I was explaining in the piece is that regarding Gaza, it is true that it is unclear whether the United States will succeed in stabilizing it and ending the conflict, etc. But what Trump is doing very cleverly is that he's neutralizing it. He is bringing U.S. allies together with Israel and thinking together about what to do regarding the tragedy and how to help Israel secure its interests in the region. And I think that it was a very clever move because we are not sure whether he will succeed. But what we are sure about is that he will make the conflict obsolete in terms of political gains, since every country, whenever Trump wants to do something, they talk to him about Gaza. And so he's freezing Gaza so that he can advance on other agendas, like the Middle East corridor with India, like expanding the Abraham Accords. And I think that this is the game here.
It's an enormous gain. Thank you so much, Zineb Riboua. We really appreciate having you on the program. We'll look forward to having you back here again in the future. Folks, follow her work on X at Zineb Riboua, Riboua. Breaking Battlegrounds will be back on the air next week. But in the meantime, if you are not downloading the podcast, go to Substack, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your favorite content. We are there, and once you download, you're going to get Kylie's Corner. You get a lot of additional content that we put on the podcast. We have our good friend Shay Khatiri coming up today. You're not going to want to miss it. So check that out. Go to breakingbattlegrounds.vote or wherever you get your favorite podcast, and we'll see you next week.
I say this every election cycle, and I'll say it again. The 2024 political field was intense. So don't get left behind in 2025. If you're running for office, the first thing on your to-do list should be securing your name on the web. With a yourname.vote domain from GoDaddy.com, you'll stand out and make your mark. Don't wait. Get yours today.
Ho, 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 ho. What do you get when you mix cocoa, candy canes, and strong Wi-Fi signals? You get a podcast. That's right, Santa has a podcast. I'm telling stories from the North Pole, sharing elf updates, and answering your questions. And yes, spilling some holiday secrets. It's festive, it's fun, and fueled entirely by cookies. Tune in wherever you get your podcast. It's Santa Has a Podcast. Just press play.
Welcome to the podcast portion of Breaking Battlegrounds with us, Chuck Warren. I'm Sam Stone. Of course, we have Kylie's Corner coming up at the end of this program, but our fantastic friend and frequent guest, Shay Khatiri, VP of Development and Senior Fellow at the Yorktown Institute. Follow him on X at Shay Khatiri. He's here to nuke some people today.
So Shay, Trump says we're going to start nuclear testing again. My understanding is that he was annoyed by a Russian test, which was a delivery test. It wasn't actually a nuclear test. And do you think he misunderstood that, or is it just Trump speak? I'm just doing a broad stroke.
So let me dive a little bit.
Was that the cruise missile test, by the way?
It was the Poseidon test.
The submarine, right?
Torpedo.
Yeah.
It was the
submarine.
torpedo.
Yeah. Okay.
So the president tweeted that we're going to resume nuclear testing. And then he says, we have the biggest nuclear arsenal, one. And two, I modernized our nuclear arsenal my first term. Those actually, the second one is half true. The first one is completely wrong. And going back to what Trump is talking about, I think the problem is that the president is not being served well by his staff because it's not his job to know every detail. It's his staff's job to give him those details, and he did not have them.
That's fair. I agree with that.
I agree with that up to the point that Trump tweets it out without asking.
Well, that's him, though. So you know
I know.
that. So I want to get back to Shay, but what they probably need to start doing, someone next to him needs to have an index card when something like that happens because he reacts and just said, this is what it is.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, continue.
Wait, you, like, staff next to him could say, like, Mr. President, let me just ask someone about this.
Right.
I would not want to be that staffer, but okay. Go ahead.
So we don't have the largest nuclear arsenal in the world, first of all. We signed a treaty with Russia under Obama, New START treaty, New Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty. And that capped the number of so-called strategic nuclear weapons. That is, our submarine ballistic missiles, heavy bomber nuclear weapons, and ICBMs to 1,550 for each side, and 800 launchers. Now, we have 100 or 200, depending on estimates, theater nuclear weapons. These are shorter range, smaller weapons. Russia has 2,000 of them. So they outmatch us by different estimates, 10 or 20 to 1.
And that's a legacy of like the Fulda Gap thinking from the Cold War, where they really, posited using tactical nukes to open up a battlefield.
Right. Yep. Yeah. And now that's just in Europe. In Asia, we have none. We have no theater nuclear weapon deployed in Asia.
Let me ask you a question on that. So let's say we do that. How does China react to that? Is that a major meltdown of meltdowns?
I mean, probably, but what are they going to do about it? That's the question. It's not that the Chinese do not think that they're ready to go to war with us. They can be annoyed. They can do economic stuff, but what are they going to do?
Sorry, I'm throwing a curveball at you here, but there's been rumors for years that Israel and Taiwan co-developed nukes in the 70s.
Taiwan, I don't know about the ties. I know that Israelis did a lot with the South Africans and the French, but the Taiwanese did have an active nuclear program until the 1970s when we got them to stop. Now, that is very interesting because they can resume it, 1. 2, the second problem with nukes in Asia is where would you house them? There needs to be a country that allows us to put it there. We did have in South Korea, we pulled them out. Now, one obvious option is Taiwan, but we don't want to touch anything that has to do with Taiwan. There's Vietnam, there's maybe Australia. If they let us, they probably would. But goes back now to the INF, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, that Trump in his first term withdrew from. Why did he withdraw? 1, Russia was cheating. 2, he had an eye on China.
I'm shocked Russia was cheating, but go on.
I know, right?
That never happens.
Does Russia never not cheat on these?
They didn't cheat on...
Chuck, if you ain't cheating, you ain't trying.
That's right.
They didn't cheat on New START until they just stopped allowing inspections according to the treaty. So we don't know anymore. They're probably cheating. But the short answer is no, the Russians always cheat. Now, Trump withdrew from INF. To do what? We haven't done anything with... I was supportive of withdrawing from INF, but you have to take advantage of it. You have to put back intermediate range nuclear forces in Europe. Poland would love us if we did that. You had an eye on China. My friend Eric Sayer was pushing for withdrawal with an eye on China. Why are we not talking with the Asians to deploy nuclear weapons in Asia? And this is especially important because, if, let's say, you're in war with China. China has ICBMs. And to neutralize those, you probably need to nuke them themselves. You need to nuke the nukes, right?
Right.
So if you nuke them from the United States, they have about half an hour notice. If you nuke them from Asia, they have 7-8 minutes notice.
Right.
They cannot preemptively launch them against us out of fear of losing them.
Does that make... to me, that just means, listen, we better be building a lot more submarines.
Yes.
A lot more submarines. And right now, we're not doing that,
So
really.
that's actually submarines, very important, and I agree with that. It's both submarines and land-based. But back to submarines. Trump says, I modernized our nuclear forces, which is true. The most important one of them is Columbia-class submarine, right? But we're going to produce a few that are going to come online in mid-2030s. If the president really wants to advance our nuclear modernization as he brags, he needs to cut a lot of red tape, throw a lot of money at our delivery forces, such as the Columbia class. There are also another, which is the air-launched capabilities that we have, not just heavy bombers, we have also long-range standoff missiles. throw a lot of money at that. Have a lot of them come online in this decade.
What's a lot of money to get that up by 2030?
Depends. I cannot give you exact numbers, but if you look at the money allocated to it, it is in tens of billions of dollars right now, and it's under 10% of the defense budget. Yeah,
to protect your security.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a funny one. Maybe you know about this, because I think I've always been a big fan of Tom Clancy, and he clearly had really good sources in the military-industrial complex, because literally like every weapons system the guy wrote about turned out about 20 years later. You're like, oh, there it is.
There's another explanation, which is they would read him
and say,
we should make this one.
I've always wondered which way that was, right? Like, because 100% of all the weapons he describes in his book, somehow they show up. But one of the interesting ones is that we appear to now be using the propulsion system that was theoretically used by the Red October in Hunt for the Red October, an internal non-propeller propulsion system in our subs.
But before I get to that, one more thing. When I said it's under 10% of the defense budget, that's under 10% of defense budget. It's like a couple percentage points in the whole U.S. budget.
Yeah, it's nothing in terms of the budget.
But back to the nuclear propulsion, that actually reminds me. In grad school, I was very late to propose my topic for research, and I'm like, what should I propose? And I'm like, okay, I'll just do a nuclear propelled submarine. And I go to the professor. It's like, yeah, this is a great topic. And he's like, excellent, very important. And I'm like, oh, well, I chose it. And he says, of course, nobody had ever chosen it because it's so complicated. Nobody wanted to. Look, very courageous of you. I'm like, oh my God, what have I done? So I spent 4 months not doing anything.
So let me ask you this question. Where did Biden and Obama go wrong on our nuclear forces and modernizing them?
So before going to modernization, actually the first place we went wrong was the New START that Obama signed with Russia. And the problem with that was it's, it capped the number of our so-called strategic nuclear forces, but the Russians had an advantage in theater weapons, and we were never going to build more under the context. So it already created that problem. Second, it did not include China. So when we signed that, China had about 50 ICBMs,
primarily nukes,
yes, and today it has 400. And by mid-2030s, it's going to catch up with us. Mm-hmm. Second, by the way, Obama did not want to modernize our forces. The reason that it happened was Republicans told him, if you want us to ratify this treaty, you have to modernize. That was a compromise that he made. And really quickly, the second problem, first month in office, Joe Biden, without any renegotiation, extends New START for 5 years. It expires in February, and Putin has asked Trump to renew it. There's no mechanism to renew it beyond its expiration. But who knows? Maybe they negotiate something, and that would be a catastrophe if we do that, if we extend it.
What would you say the similarities are between Obama's negotiating the START treaty and his Iran deal? Are there similarities? And I mean, I think these are good case studies on how he views negotiations with America's enemies. What would you say the common denominator is?
I would say one is that he inserted a lot of verification mechanisms in both, but again, you can verify that the other side is doing something that only to the extent that you know, right? And the second one was he absolutely had no interest in exerting pressure.
So actually, I want to tie this back to something that was in one of the articles by one of your friends who we had on the program earlier, Zineb Riboua, who in her piece, The Logic of Trump's Neutralization Strategy, talks about how prior, particularly the Clinton, Obama, Biden administrations viewed the process as a victory.
Right.
Do you think that applies here as well? That they're so much about, like, as long as we're sitting and making deals, then that's a win, no matter what the outcome of the deal is? That's what has driven them in this direction?
I'll tell you a story. Once Robert Gates, who was Secretary of Defense in second Bush administration, was in Moscow negotiating with the Russian Joint Staff. And as the actually, I think it was as the Russian general is going on and on, he writes something on a piece of paper and passes it to his aide, his number 2. And the aide says, I thought it was probably about how much we were going to compromise on the range of interceptors that they wanted to put in Poland. He opens the paper and says, and Gates was a Sovietologist who had been out of government for 15 years before coming back. And he says, I had been out of this for so long, I had forgotten how much I effing hate these people. And I think that's something that Obama never understood, which is these are people you have to hate. You cannot make friends with.
They're not our friends.
We have adversaries in the world, and you need to treat them as adversaries.
They're not your friends.
The purpose of... There's a great book for anybody interested. It's called Putin's People by Catherine Belton.
Putin's People?
Yes.
Okay.
And it's about the rise of Putin to power. And the point of it is that when Soviet Union collapsed, the Russian security forces said, okay, so the purpose of our country, Russia, is to defeat our enemies in the West. Communism didn't work. We're going to adopt capitalism to defeat them. That is the purpose of the Russian state, hating us. And same as the Islamic Republic of Iran. If you want, Obama thought that if we can just make nice to them, they would understand us better. As opposed to there's something in this political culture that is objectionable to us.
It's basically the premise of every movie
Right.
where the bad guys are telling the guy he's trying to make peace as a sheriff, right? We're going to do this right. Then all of a sudden he's just had enough and kills them all, right?
Do you know what? I actually think that this has really hurt filmmaking in the last 10, 15 years.
It's Roadhouse, baby.
Yeah, because they won't have enemies.
Yes.
Like, you can't have the Chinese be the bad guys.
Well, did you see the
Russians?
Did you see the House of
bad
Dynamite?
guys.
Did you see the House of Dynamite on Netflix?
I haven't watched it yet.
I highly recommend everybody watch it. Just watch it, and it's just about what happens when they launch. And I thought it was very well done. In the city they're targeting is Chicago, which was interesting. And the premise of it from the advisors was, well, he's targeting Chicago as a one-launch strike. And it comes out it's pretty much North Korea. They don't quite say it, but that's what it is. But they do Chicago because Chicago's gone, but you're really going to go full blown over Chicago. I mean, that was basically it, right?
Well, here's my question also. Given the current state of Chicago and given the current state of Hiroshima, is this a bad idea?
Well, watch it. Everybody watch it. It was very good.
It's a bad idea if others do it. Only we get to do it to ourselves.
Let me ask you something. We talk about nuclear. You and I have talked about this, the Golden Dome.
Yeah.
This goes back to the progressives melting down about the Golden Dome, but they have no problem. We have Patriot missiles knocking things down and so forth. You and I both believe the Golden Dome's necessary, and sooner rather than later. Right? And again, it's not...
Research should never have been paused the way it was for 20 years.
Why do you think that? Tell our listeners, why is the Golden Dome and the $175 billion we're going to spend, which will probably end up being $250 billion, but why is that money, taxpayer money, needed for the Golden Dome?
So I have always believed that the primary role of the U.S. government is not to... we can have our differences about healthcare and SNAP programs and all this, but the primary purpose of the U.S. government is to provide security to its citizens. And everything else becomes a luxury.
We've talked about it. I think everything else in this country would be better if the federal government just got out of it and let the states have their own regimes.
By the way, I do think you and I have talked about this, and I've thought about this a lot. I think the quickest way to turn down the pressure that's going on in public is that we truly have federalism.
Yeah.
We print currency. We significantly reduce what the national government does and give it back to the states, and the segue
and then New York can be socialist.
They do all they want.
Right.
But, I agree with you guys. I'm conservative, but I'm willing to have that disagreement and that debate with the left. I just don't think that it's up for debate that before any of that, you need to protect your citizens.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah. And the Golden Dome, what it does is, or Strategic Defense Initiative under Reagan, the purpose is that if there are missiles coming in, they get to be intercepted so they cannot hit American cities. Now, it's not perfect.
No.
Yeah, but for one, there's going to be leakage.
It's a bullet hitting a bullet.
Yeah, but actually, that is much easier. The bigger problems are the leakage that might cause, and then if there's an interception, there's going to be gamma ray that would cause EMP. All this, but millions not dying is a good place to start. And now that's one thing.
Another good place to start is and my dear Republican friends. This is why we spend money on foreign aid and diplomacy.
Yeah.
Because it's always good to have somebody that can pick up the phone and talk to the other person. Yep. And again, they may be the enemy, but there may be a trust factor saying, let's dial it down a little bit.
There's that. And that's why I've always believed that we need more money to have better diplomats, because when you cut diplomatic budget,
right,
you get the worst people in it. Of course you're going to have bad diplomats when you don't pay for
You
good
get
ones.
mid-level managers.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you get mid-level managers.
But going back to Golden Dome, there's a second benefit to it. Against Ukraine, and if something happens with China against China, how often did we not do something because we were scared that Putin is going to nuke us? No.
Correct.
Imagine that threat eliminated. You can give whatever you want to your
wasn't that Biden's whole Ukraine strategy?
Yes. It was the whole thing. And, you eliminate Russian bluffing completely. You eliminate Chinese bluffing completely.
Right. I agree. As a matter of fact, one thing this House of Dynamite did, they had two interceptors go, and they both missed, right? And they were saying, well, launch another one, right? Because it was coming from D.C. to Alaska. And she said, we only have 50, so we have 48 left. We don't know what else is coming. So basically, buy Chicago.
Right.
We don't know what else is coming. You can't spend them all on one. We don't know if this is a full-scale attack. Golden Dome needs to be a part, like, whatever's coming, we're going after.
So there is a government document every new administration produces called Nuclear Posture Review. And then there's a congressional commission, independent commission, that has to review that. And the chair of it for the last one was our own Senator John Kyle. And it's a very good study. It's bipartisan, but
I'd feel very good with Senator Kyle leading that commission, and not so good if it was any of our current ones. But yeah, continue.
Yes. And the issue was that with the Strategic Defense Initiative, there was a good case to be made that it was too expensive at the time. It is not expensive anymore. That is not an expensive
Even at the time, if you ran the numbers sounded huge, but it wasn't, when you're talking about the overall spending,
right?
It wasn't that crazy.
There's a second difference this time, which is at the time, well, first of all, going back to...
You were inventing all the technology from scratch.
Well, yes, but also the issue was that I hate the fact that our Cold War strategy was if you kill a million of us will kill a million of you. I mean, like, it worked, but it works
mutually assured destruction for a reason, the term.
Yeah, but I mean, it works until it doesn't, and it's not the best policy. But, it was this time we have a second problem, which is soon enough we're going to have two nuclear peer adversaries, China and Russia. How do you deter two at the same time?
China also has a very different cultural view of the value of individual life. $1 million for $1 million doesn't sound like a bad deal in their culture. Mao
famously said, if there let it be a nuclear war, if 20 or 100 million people die, it's okay. We'll get socialism in the end, global socialism in the end.
I have one last question here before we end this segment of the podcast and get to Kylie's Corner. So, do you have the military aid that has the football? For people who don't understand, the football has, the nuclear codes and so forth, and they're always with the president. How is that person chosen? Because I was thinking about it. That has to be a certain personnel. I mean, do they do a personality? Yeah. I mean, it has to be somebody that's fairly calm saying, here's your code, sir. Without crying.
That has to be one of the most psychologically analyzed humans on the planet.
Do you know how they pick that person and how long they stay in that position?
I don't think anybody outside the government knows, because
No, I mean it's
you don't want anybody to know.
They carry this briefcase, this satchel that has our nuclear codes, and you're next to the president at all. He doesn't go anywhere without this person, right? Yeah. Okay, so is it more than one person?
No, I think it is.
So, I mean,
you
have a shift? Yes,
there are more than yes.
How is this? The more I've thought about it, and again, that movie sparked it for me because this person plays a prominent role in it. I've never thought about it before. That's a person that has to have a certain mental capacity to handle pressure and to be able to act in a cognitive manner.
They also have to be somebody who is the kind of person who can say absolutely nothing about their job. And think of all the people you know. Do you know anybody in your life who says nothing about their job to anybody?
Don't give an opinion.
Right.
I mean, the thing about this movie, the reason it made me think about it, the president kept asking this guy, what would you do? He goes, it's not my job. Here's your code. And he goes, here's your option. So he gives him this 3-ring binder, which was funny. He's going through a 3-ring binder instead of knowing beforehand. And he finally said, what option would you choose? And he said, well, this is the one. It was full scale. He goes, you don't know what's coming.
Yeah.
But we know we're under attack, so we don't hold back, But he kept trying to give his opinion, and he really just kept refusing to give his opinion. Here's the code, 00,
The code also, I think, with the new technologies just changes digitally.
All the time. Yeah, all the time. Yeah. So, well, Shay, thanks for joining us today. Folks, this is Breaking Battlegrounds. We'll be right back with fan favorite Kylie's Corner.
All right, welcome back to Breaking Battlegrounds. As we wrap up today, I want to thank all of our guests, but get to the... Look, we know what you're waiting for. We know why you're still here and listening to this podcast. There's only one reason, and it comes with music.
It's the best part.
Talking about crimes and the ones committed, murder and mayhem in a world of sin and Kylie's on a roll. Kylie's got a corner and she's gonna start spilling out all the true crime in the world we're living in. So come and take a spin and listen in.
Okay. Well, I have 2 updates on cases that I've talked about in the past, and then I'll talk about a new case. So the first one is the father from Tucson who left his daughter in the car and died. He killed himself.
Yes.
I saw that.
Before,
like hours
before he was supposed to be going to prison. So he's a coward. And then that's that.
He was a pretty awful... I hadn't followed that case that deeply, even though it's here in our backyard, basically. Yeah. But I started digging in. This guy's got a horrific history.
Yes. Of doing the exact same thing. He has 4 daughters, and he's done it. And one of his daughters was with another marriage, and she's either like 16 or 17. And she's like, this happened my entire time growing up. Like, he would use the car as a babysitter.
Well, and there's a lot of allegations that appear to be true about abuse.
Yeah.
I mean, him being very abusive, very controlling. I don't know if it was drugs or alcohol type issue, but boy, this guy was a bad dude.
I'd probably say both. Bad dude. So,
Goodbye.
Yeah, bye.
Good riddance.
No one's going to miss you. Next case is Abby's Warner. She was the teacher who was shot by the 6-year-old student. She was awarded, she filed a lawsuit against the vice principal for neglect because there was 4 reports that day that the kid had a gun and the vice principal ignored it, making excuses saying his pockets were too small to have a gun, or saying his mom's going to pick him up soon. We don't need to get the cops involved. And then the teacher was shot in the chest and in the hand. He was actually shot fired off 6 shots. So, she won the case. She filed for $40 million. She won $10 million, but there's still speculation if she's going to get the $10 million because of.
It'll take years. They will appeal. The school board will fight this to the end. And what's funny about that, because have dealt with over the years a lot of government settlement deals. Mm-hmm. This is the kind of thing, if you took the racial politics out, the board pays instantly.
Yeah.
But they're going to fight it forever and put this teacher in the position where she has to spend 15, 20 years trying to get this money.
Yeah.
Because they're afraid of the racial politics.
And
this
something I found fascinating was her life expectancy now. So she was 25 when she was shot in the chest, and the bullet is still lodged in her chest.
Probably lived to 40, 45.
Yeah, right now it says 53, but that's, and the vice principal's argument was she used real-time judgment, not hindsight judgment.
Yeah.
Which I don't know, four people coming to you saying they have a gun.
Is this vice principal still employed?
Honestly, not at this school. But I was trying to find if she is, and I couldn't find where she is.
You know what? I will bet you she's employed by a public school somewhere in a similar type position.
Yeah. I was trying to find, and I couldn't figure out where she was. But I would be interested. I'll keep you posted if I can find anything on that. But the real case that I want to talk about today is about a 44-year-old nurse who was just found guilty for murdering 10 of his patients out in Germany and attempting to kill 27 because he was the night shift nurse and he wanted to lessen his workload. So he was injecting his patients, his older patients, with painkillers and sedatives like morphine, and prosecutors believed that he was just irritated by some of the patients, and that's how he kind of chose which ones to murder. And he believed himself to be the master of life and death. So he was the decision maker if they were to live or die.
So he's perfect for Canadian nursing programs.
Well, I was going to say, so then I'm looking into it. He gets life in prison, right? He's convicted of life in prison, but that doesn't actually mean in Germany they get life in prison. So after 15 years, anyone who has life in prison gets a 15-year, like after 15 years, they're eligible for parole.
Right.
Like, what's the point of doing all that then? But he did have they called it a particular severity of guilt, which means he just like wasn't guilty that he did this.
Right.
So that pushes it back to 20 years, 20 to 25 years. And I was looking into this more. And actually, what they're calling him is the worst serial killer in Germany, did the exact same thing. He killed 200 patients, over 200 patients.
I would bet you there is a lot more of this that occurs around the world
than
you ever will know because of the liability. These hospitals are covering it up for all they are worth.
100%.
Yeah. Which it was an internal investigation that triggered this because there were so many deaths under his supervision that they were looking into it. And they're saying he attempted to kill 27 others, but he had 4 other nursing jobs. So they're now looking into those situations.
No doubt. If you're doing it at one place, you're doing it at all.
Yeah, you're not just. Yeah. And then I looked into it in the United States. Yeah, it happens a lot too here. So
yeah, no, I can see both how someone, frankly, when you're a nurse and what you have to deal with, especially with the way people act today, if you're mentally on the edge to begin with, you're going over.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about a profession with a really high likelihood of developing this kind of thing.
Totally. Yeah.
And in a certain sense, you can almost understand it because, God, people have been awful the last 5 years.
And something that all of these cases have in common is they're all night nurses.
I would bet there's a psychological connection there to the type of person to sleep disorders, but also the type of person who would take the night shift.
Yeah. And just something to look into.
Yeah.
If you're out there and you do research.
Yeah. Why are the night shift nurses killers instead of porn stars?
Yeah. So,
it's really weird, though. You always get a story like this every couple of years.
Well, that's because I don't think it's that uncommon.
No. It's just what a weird mindset.
So try to go to the doctor in the day.
Yeah, like 11 o'clock, 11 a.m. They've had their coffee.
Try to hold it out.
They're not hitting the afternoon nap time.
I can't believe, by the way, that Chuck, you missed my Little Big League reference with the night shift nurses.
Wait, I missed it.
Little Big League, the movie. This kid becomes the man. His grandfather owns the Twins. He passes away. The kid inherits the team, and he takes over managing them. And they go on, and do a bunch of winning. But there's a sort of funny interlude in the middle where the kid finds the hotel pay-per-view and watches night shift nurses like 73 times on one road trip, and then he comes back and his mom's got the bill for the
Oh my God. All right. That's all I have for you today.
Well, I have, as we wrap up the show, I have a funny story. So our mutual friend Tim is in Maine, and he had to wire some money to some canvassers yesterday, and he's in Maine, and he calls me and says, did you know Maine doesn't have a Wells Fargo? I said, well, that's not surprising. It's a Western Southern bank. So to go do his wire, which he had to have out, he had to catch a flight from Portland, Maine to New York so he can go to New York and get the wires out in time.
Right.
So as he went back to go get his flight, it was canceled. And then every other flight was canceled because of our air traffic control problem. So then he goes to Enterprise. And Enterprise says, well, you already have a car rented in Maine. He says, yeah. And he goes and he explains the situation. They go, yeah, you're not getting a car. So he finally found one place that had cars still, $1 rental car. And he got there like an hour out of town and just went to bed last night at a hotel. So it's a typical Tim story. But, this air traffic control, I was supposed to have a client come in yesterday. I said, don't bother.
No.
I was supposed to be in Miami this weekend. I canceled that.
I actually, because I don't know, here's where I'm at with it. I have basically one more course I have to take for election certification for a national cert thing. There's 2 options this coming year, one in January and one in May. And I just moved the January one to May because I'm not sure how long this mess is going to go and how quickly it'll recover. DC in January, Chicago in May. Now, that's the other part of it. Let's be honest. Chicago in May, much nicer than DC in January. So maybe there's a little self-interest there. I'm just using the opportunity.
Well, a good friend of mine who is the vice president of an airport, we were talking last week, and his theory was this will be done the weekend before Thanksgiving, and he's Republican, because he believes that the Trump administration and the Congress do not want people not being able to get home for Thanksgiving. I don't know. I mean, that makes sense. On a gut level, that makes sense. I
think Democrats have dug in.
I think they've dug in, and so it goes to the point about the filibuster, and Shay, you're here with us in the studio to let us know. I'm a big believer in the filibuster. I do think it needs some reforms. I think it should be speaking or whatever. You can't do a baton and hand off, but it has to be something, right? It's a little right now. It's like, I'm taking my ball and going home, so we're not going to vote on this, right? So, folks, by the way, Democrats have voted 15 times against reopening the government. Again, that's 15. That's more than 14, less than 16. And they're going to vote again this weekend, I think. And 16 times they'll vote against it by Monday morning.
15 is an interesting number because that's how many times they voted for clean continuing resolutions under Joe Biden.
Yeah, so folks, just so you know about the shutdown, all that was asked is that they pass the budget for a temporary period that's the same spending level as next year. Nothing was added. I mean, that's what this is.
Nothing added, nothing subtracted. So here's the same monies.
So it goes to an interesting point. We were talking about the filibuster. The reason there's a filibuster, there's a reason for it, right? And I keep telling people who are like, just rip this off and do it. It's like, you're going to pay a price for this one day, right? If you had not had the filibuster last cycle, you would have had HB1, that horrendous voting rights bill that Democrats want to push, so forth. But Sam, you made the point earlier. And Trump's made it. Do you think they're really not going to go just rip this up when they get the majority back in the Senate now?
So I'm here to talk about nukes, and let's talk about nuking the filibuster. I keep hearing that filibuster is a founding era principle, etc., etc. Yes and no. The founding era principle of filibuster is debating, which is you go take the floor and talk.
Right.
That's
right.
Mr. Smith goes to Washington.
Yes.
In the 1970s, we create the second form of filibuster. Mike Mansfield and Bob Byrd, the Democratic leaders in the Senate, created the cloture motion, which is any random senator can put a hold on a bill, and then it requires 60 votes to pass it. This is a 50-year-old thing. This is not the founding era principle. I have a theory, which is if you want to stop the work of government, you should hold your, and not go to the bathroom for 24 hours or however it takes. You need to pay a price for it. It cannot be that you just put a hold, don't go. And by the way, people say it creates bipartisanship. 2 questions. Do you think that we are more bipartisan or less since the 1960s?
Or less.
Yeah, and you know what? Because if you have a bill you don't like, you can just stop it completely now. In the past, you had to work with the other party, propose amendments to fix it, to make it better. It actually has discouraged bipartisanship. Nobody works through the committee.
I will say this again. I'm big on traditional norms. There's a reason they're on it, because I do believe our founding fathers in those sense had some wisdom. I do think the best thing for Republicans keeping the Senate and the House in 2026 is them scrapping the filibuster.
And
so
just
their,
move.
So their
Yep.
base just sees they're passing stuff. So I see stuff all the time. You probably see it on X. There are some on both sides. There are some people who are very thoughtless. They don't really know anything. They keep saying, and I love the Democrats line. Republicans control the presidency, they control the Senate, they control the Congress, the House, and I'm like, you're a U.S. senator, you know the rules, you know why, and it's always like, take a civics lesson, right? And there are those on the right saying, well, we control things, why have we not passed these? Because of, I always reply back, you need a civics lesson. Right? I mean, I hate the fact that you're coming out making a comment and don't understand the rules.
Well, I think they do is what makes it worse. I
don't think they know. Most of these people on X.
Well, some random person, but when you're talking obviously elected officials, and this is
I've seen
this on both sides, right, Chuck? And I'm really frustrated with this because this started with Democrats, but now our side's doing it too. Where they say things they know,
right,
are absolute lies.
Trash. Democrats do it
lies. Democrats do it all the time. Hakeem Jeffries gets up there. 90% of what he puts out on Twitter is just an abject rejection of the truth. And our side's now doing it too. And it's really, really, really bad for this country.
Well, it's brain rot.
Yeah.
It's simply brain rot.
Yeah.
And what always amazes me is how little they think of voters. They actually think voters are stupid.
Well, they clearly do. Yes.
Yeah, they do. Well, especially progressives.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at their feed, because we check on all the time, it's the same thing. I mean, they may alter a comma, but it's like, here's your talking points today. They're like a bunch of marching penguins. They're just clapping together, right?
It's disconcerting because you've read all this stuff as we grew up. You've read all this stuff in the history books about the rise of whether it was the Nazis or the Stalinists or, Mao or any of these movements. And you're like, how did they convince these people to be this stupid? We're seeing it in real time.
Well, we are. Well, folks, thank you for joining us this week at Breaking Battlegrounds. You can follow us at breakingbattlegrounds.vote. Sam and Kylie and Shay, we had an international show today. We had United Kingdom, Morocco, and Iran. I mean, and Tucson, Arizona could be part of that UN as well, because I really don't consider it part of the United States.
I'm trying to expel
It's barely hanging on. It's like hanging on by a thread, Chuck. And that thread, by the way, is the University of Arizona basketball team.
Doing great.
They're fantastic as always. Yes.
So, folks, for your only talk show in the nation that has the United Nations flair and helps you understand the world, thank you for visiting us. Also, subscribe to our Substack, and you can get our podcasts wherever you pick up your podcast. Have a great weekend.